This is a cow, unless it's on a menu, and then it's beef. But why? Why? Welcome, barbarians. Today we're talking about food and how we talk about it. Specifically, why English is sometimes just plain frustrating.
Why are you the way that you are?
We're also going to look at how language is just one of several forces driving us ever further from our food, and how a single legal decision around an exciting emerging technology could radically transform the future of food entirely, and what that even means for us.
Your fat cartridge might be low.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Great Scott! I know, this is heavy.
Let's back up a bit, like 1,000 years, give or take. You see, back in 1066, England was a kingdom in shambles. Its king, Edward the Confessor, was a little more forthcoming with promises than children, and died in January with no clear heir, inviting a bit of a power vacuum to come help clean up the mess. Claimants from all over Europe got sucked into the fray, trying to secure the title for themselves. And first to step up to take the title for himself was Harold Godwinson, a powerful Anglo-Saxon noble who had effectively been running Edward's kingdom behind the scenes for years and just kind of went with it after he died. But of course, not everyone was on board with the status quo, especially William, Duke of Normandy, who insisted his was the only valid claim to the throne. Uninterested in diplomacy, William rallied his Norman troops to sail across the English Channel and take the crown from Harold by force, if necessary. And to his credit, William did just that at the Battle of Hastings. Harold's army, already exhausted from suppressing other attacks, held their own until they saw their leader fall on the battlefield. They quickly routed, basically handing William and his supporters the keys to the kingdom and the title he so desperately desired. As the Normans established their rule, they quickly set about implementing a series of land reforms, designed to bolster their power and wealth while simultaneously weakening the Anglo-Saxon population.
Cancel the kitchen scraps for lepers and orphans. No more merciful beheadings. And call off Christmas.
In one fell swoop, vast swaths of land were seized from the natives and redistributed to the incoming Norman elite. These reforms devastated the local farmers, who basically overnight found themselves thrown down to the bottom rung of a new social order, stripped of their ancestral lands and forced to work as serfs for the very people who had taken everything from them. Meanwhile, the Norman lords reveled in their newfound wealth and status, using it to build grand castles across the countryside as symbols of their dominance and bases from which to exert their authority. These imposing structures also marked the widening cultural and social divide between the Anglo-Saxon serfs and their Norman overlords. The castles stood as constant reminders of the rigid hierarchy imposed upon the land and the people who had once called it their own. And as the years passed, the widening moat between the classes only grew more entrenched. The Norman nobles, with their sophisticated tastes and opulent lifestyles, viewed their Anglo-Saxon subjects as little more than uncultured peasants. Eventually, however, the lines between them did begin to blur, giving rise to a curious blending of the two cultures. Fast forward to today, and our language still bears the scars of those ancient class divisions. Many fancy words used today come from the Norman nobles, like chivalry, royalty, and even beef. While beef may not seem like a luxury to us today, that was certainly not the case for much of our history. And many third world countries today still view meat as a luxury. But why? Well, it's expensive. So expensive that even the Anglo-Saxon kings only ate meat a few times a year. Animals like cows and sheep provided a steady stream of food or labor. Why kill them for meat when they provide wool and dairy and help to do much of the heavy lifting? In reality, it was actually the Normans and their castles that could feast on the food without dealing with the gross details of raising and preparing it. Therefore, the Anglo-Saxons had a lot of experience with raising and managing farm animals, while the Normans, well, they had a lot more experience eating them. Over time, Middle English formalized those changes, and now we commonly refer to farm animals the way an Anglo-Saxon farmer might, using words like cow, pig, or sheep. But when we want to eat them, well, then we become Norman lords and feast on beef, pork, or mutton. And this linguistic separation between the animals we raise and the food we eat was only the beginning of a much broader trend of emotional distancing from our food. For example, many of us Westerners no longer even see the animal when we look at our food. The way meat is butchered, processed, and presented bears little resemblance to the original animal. This visual separation makes it easier for people to disassociate their meals from the living creatures they once were.
No!
Not only do we not know what our food looks like, we also have no clue how it's raised. I mean, how many farmers do you know personally? Probably not many, since barely 1% of the US population even works on a farm anymore. And under 20% even live in the nearby rural areas, meaning many of us are simply disconnected from the source of our food.
Is this chicken what I have, or is this fish?
Not just visually or linguistically,
I
but
know it's tuna, but it says chicken
physically and logistically.
by the sea.
This growing distance between people and their food sources makes it harder for people to understand and appreciate the origins of their meals, compounding the emotional distancing that has evolved over the centuries.
What? It's smiling at me.
But that emotional distancing will certainly continue to accelerate, especially with the emergence of a new technology, 3D food printing, which will no doubt massively transform the way we think about, produce, and consume our meals.
But how? How?
Well, first, let's imagine a world where every meal is tailored to your unique nutritional needs and taste preferences, all with the push of a button. No more worrying about finding a dish that suits your allergy requirements or trying to cobble together a meal from the random ingredients left in your pantry. This might sound like science fiction,
Earl Grey, decaf.
but the latest 3D food printers are already well on their way to making this vision a reality. These devices are being developed and tested, capable of printing food using edible materials like chocolate, pasta, or even plant-based meat alternatives. Some restaurants are starting to use 3D food printers to create intricate designs and shapes, while researchers are exploring the potential to print food for astronauts on long-duration space missions. One notable company at the forefront of this technology is Natural Machines with their Foodini, a 3D food printer over a decade in the making that is actually already available for purchase today, assuming you have the cash. And Natural Machines' co-founder is confident that it's only a matter of time before we begin to see them in restaurants nearby, even on our own kitchen counter.
I do see 3D printed food coming into your kitchen as a kitchen appliance, and many other industries will pick up 3D printing on a localized level to actually make customized things for you that were traditionally made off of a mass manufacturing line.
There are still some technological challenges to overcome before it's ready for mainstream commercial use. But in the meantime, let's explore what might happen once 3D food printing becomes more advanced and widely adopted. While food touches many parts of our lives, I think there are several areas that would be more impacted than others. Starting with the most obvious, our diet and nutrition. Gone are the days of carb counting, meal planning, or even searching for that gluten-free option. Offload that to the computer. And if we're no longer required to prepare our food, food safety should improve quite dramatically. I mean, hopefully kitchens will look less like an episode of Kitchen Nightmares and more like the galley in Star Trek. And that should extend to food at home as well, once printers become viable for residential use.
Smells like the real thing.
Beyond the impact to our personal health, food printing should also improve the sustainability of our food sources. Today, we rely heavily on Mother Nature to produce complex ingredients before we can step in and transform them into our food. If we can take the reins and create our food from those same initial base compounds, we would significantly reduce the risk of weather and fertility issues, as well as the distance those ingredients need to travel to our tables. And with skill barriers removed from cooking, food creation can be democratized. allowing for new combinations of flavors and forms that couldn't be achieved using traditional methods. Through social media, a new class of content creators could emerge, crowding out all but the most engaging, creative, and innovative chefs. Our feeds could be flooded with new amazing options to print at home. Finally, we can know for sure whether that viral TikTok dish actually tastes good or if everyone's just lying in the comments. Better yet, use the creator tools to make your own edits and capitalize on the trend to sell your own version. Imagine cookbooks and recipes could be packaged and offered on subscription services like Spotify. But what happens if you don't have a subscription?
That beverage has not been programmed into the replication system.
Well, I guess that depends on how the copyright laws evolve to react to this new technology. Just as the Norman lords built grand castles to exert their authority, the advent of 3D food printing could create new castles of control. Not physical structures, but legal and technological frameworks that could dictate what we eat, how we eat it, and who has access to it. You see, recipes are hard to copyright due to something called the idea-expression dichotomy. You can't copyright an idea itself, only the expression of that idea. As they exist today, it's easy to argue recipes are just an idea, since the consumer is still left to express that idea by cooking it, often altering the original idea in the process, whether intentional or not. But once the expression of a recipe can be precisely controlled through 3D printing technology, copyrights start to sound more likely to apply, especially as the results become more artistic in design, capitalizing on the new capabilities of the technology. How those copyrights are applied to traditional recipes could drastically change the social landscape as well. We may expect classic dishes like spaghetti and meatballs to fall into public domain and be available for everybody. But sometimes litigious companies figure out ways to hold public works hostage. But even if you can't afford to print Gordon Ramsay's latest recipe, you can at least try to cook it yourself, right? Well, maybe not. As 3D food printing becomes the norm, traditional cooking infrastructure will slowly disappear in new home designs, as they adapt to and leave us reliant on these automated systems. Governments could even go so far as to mandate the use of printers in the name of safety or sustainability, allowing for increased control over the food that we eat.
Replicator systems are offline at the request of Stellar Cartography.
Regardless of exactly how we navigate these challenges, one thing is almost inevitable. Food culture is facing a radical transformation. As 3D food printers become more prevalent, whether by choice or regulation, these innovations have the potential to transform not just the way we produce and consume food, but also the very essence of food culture, as traditions long associated with food erode and evolve with the times. Throughout history, food culture has been strongly influenced by local ingredients and traditions. Regional cuisines developed based on the availability of resources, the local climate, and unique tastes and techniques passed down through the generations. But recent advances in communication, transportation, and food preservation have increased access to global ingredients and techniques worldwide, often resulting in new fusion flavors forging a new path from the contributing traditions.
Pineapple pizza.
Are you
As technological innovations increasingly sever these connections to the old ways, food culture will have to find new roots to ground and define it. With the rise of social media, we have already seen an initial shift in how people present and consume food, with Instagram-worthy dishes taking the spotlight. As the focus on visual appeal intensifies and the process of cooking is replaced by 3D printing, creators will compete for attention and revenue by offering unique and visually stunning recipes. Before long, food culture may even become so disconnected with the old ways that it starts to resemble the world of fashion, where influence from family and tradition is overwhelmed by friends and trends. So, as you sit down to your next meal, whether it's a traditional family recipe or a 3D printed delicacy, take a moment to reflect on the rich tapestry of history, culture, and innovation that has brought it to your plate. And as we journey into this new culinary frontier, Let us do so with awareness and intention, mindful of the choices we make and the control we retain.